the mother, father, creator. So we're talking about the trinity of creation, the mother, the father, and the children. That is Genesis 1:27. In his own image. No one, the nature had nothing to do with the soil, had nothing to do with the environment that was created for the animals. The environment of the earth was created for the animal nature that would exist. But we find in Genesis 2:7, and the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. And they were not blessed. He was not blessed. So we have another man whose nature was the nature of the dust and the ground. This is where the Geraldic people went into that environment. And they were shaped by that. They were environmentally shaped. Because God had already created the nature of the dust and ground for the animals. And they went and became part of that. They became part of the environment that God had already created. And the Lord formed man of the dust and ground. He formed the nature of the animals of the dust and ground. Formed man of the dust and ground. That's the nature. The dust and ground is the nature of the earth. The environment of the earth. Mm-hmm. And this is what the Geraldic people became. And they became the Europeans of today, whose nature had been shaped of the dust and the ground as the animals. And this is where we find the difference between what we call today the difference between the sun people and the ice people. And those two natures of man are not integratable. You cannot integrate those two opposite natures. There's no integration of those two opposite. You can't integrate the two. One must become the other. The nature must change. So it's not integration that we have. Being able to live in peace with who you are. All people must be able to live in peace and harmony. You're right, again, in selecting Benjamin Banneker, because this is that point in time, as given evidence in the prophecies that's written in our early books of the cycle when everything will be made new. That is verified in the prophecies here. I will make all things new. In Revelations, sometimes it's good to read directly. It's not me that's saying this. I'm not saying this at all. I'm only reading and telling you what has been written in the Holy Book. In Revelations chapter 21. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away. That is the 25,000-year cycle is written in the early book. And at that time, there is a new earth and a new heaven. And the old cycle passed away. It's divided into two cycles. One cycle is a feminine cycle or positive cycle. The last half cycle is a male cycle of the energies of the male and female. And that happens every 26,000 years. There is a new heaven and a new earth. That particular cycle, everything comes and is alignment. So there is key then that your head, what's in your head, is in alignment with this new beginning in this new time when all things are to be made new and the present things become former things. As it relates to us today, as it relates to the occupation of Wall Street, occupiers of Wall Street, as it relates to what's happening into our intercities, where the communities, the neighborhoods of the Afro-Americans have become the major poverty centers in America. All of those things are to be passed as former things. So the human dynamics that have created those will pass away. So therefore, all things must be made new. So we need a new thinking. A new thinking, then, where our head and our creative abilities is now over. It's the alignment where the head is to become over the animal nature. Not to be integrated, it must be over. The animal nature will always be the animal nature. That nature over the past 400 or 500 years have brought world slavery, world wars, have polluted the earth with blood. The earth, Mother Earth, has been polluted with blood under that nature, that war, survival nature. You must fight everything. I have a cold. We must fight the cold. We must fight cancer. We must fight this. We must fight that. That is from. Fight is a symbol of their way of living. That nature. When you're living that, we must fight the ability of natural foods to be presented to man. Everything is to fight and to change under that nature. The new beginning is back at that new cycle where the head, the creative, is over the body. It is appropriate at this particular time that Sphinx become the symbol of the new, as it was then at the old cycle. So we're coming into tune, we're coming in alignment, and as an example of why it's important that we know, so we can understand the deeds of that animal nature. And let's go back to the Civil War to look at what that nature will do. And we can look at the period or the battle of Newmarket Heights and the diary that was made by Sergeant Sherwood in Newmarket Heights, or Fleetwood, in the taking of the Newmarket Heights. And he was on furlough, Christmas Eve, and he was getting ready to go back. He had been fighting in the war, but he and all black troops who were ready to fight was told to wait. Lincoln said, I cannot order them into service because we're losing the war. Generals. And he put another general in charge to bring about a change, General Ulysses Grant, because the generals previous to him was losing the war. And he said, generals, you must get me a victory before I can allow the colored troops in. They're waiting.
Why?
Because history will say they won the war. We had to bring them in, and they won the war. Bring me a battle, win me one battle, so we can say we brought them in to mop up, or they only assist.
They had to win one
battle. Lincoln told his generals, General, win me one battle, just one battle, so that I can say the war, the tide is turned, and we're winning, and they're on the run, and we will now let in the colored troops to come in to mop up, to help us mop up.
But what was the truth?
The truth was they did win one battle, and then the troops, colored troops, were called in. The truth is the war was virtually lost, and that was the complaint. And then when the black troops were, colored troops were brought in, they then start winning the battles that had been lost by the white Union troops. One great battle that they had tried on 2 previous occasions, they had to win the route into Richmond. And that was controlled by a hill that was called, an area that was called the New Market, the New Market, the New Market battle, and the battle. Mm-hmm.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. The Battle of New Market Heights in Virginia was a famous battle that the colored troops would get credit of mopping up. Well, the New Market Heights battle was a strategic hill that the Confederate had under control that they could not take. So after this one battle was won by the North, the Union soldiers, they brought in the troops, and the troops then had fought a number of battles leading up to this. One of the persons was a sergeant, Fleetwood, who was on leave, had a few days to spend with his parents, and he was saying goodbye. And his beautiful fiancée, reading from the Journey of the Songhai People Bible, which is a book of many books, like the Bible, that is bringing truth to its readers. We have the sergeant saying goodbye. His beautiful fiancée tearfully asked him, "Why do you have to go back? You have fought in numerous battles. Anyway, America will forget what we're doing, like they have forgotten the thousands of black soldiers who helped win freedom in the Revolutionary War." There's another perception that blacks, the Revolutionary War, we have the perception of Paul Revere, we have a perception of General Washington crossing the Potomac in a boat, and there was just a black soldier that untied the rope from there. And there's a perception of that. The reality was, and I'll quote, thousands of black soldiers who helped win freedom in the Revolutionary War, like they have forgotten the Battle of New Orleans in the War of 1812, where General Andrew Jackson praised black troops for saving America's honor. You and I are not in slavery. We're free. Sergeant Fleetwood replied, but you and I are not free. Reminds me of what the first president of Ghana said. Ghanaians, we're not free until all of Africa is free. And we must unite. But this is what he answered to his beautiful fiancée. But you and I are not free. No black is free from the contempt and loathing of his fellow man. I can see the way we're looked at, the hatred. I go to fight to win respect and honor of all black people, not just the blasting off the chains of slavery of millions of our people. I shall fight to win respect and honor for us and our children and our children's children. Will you wait for me? Will you marry me when I return till death do us part? Let us not say goodbye. Just say till we meet again. And he went back to fight. But then there came a battle cry. And that battle cry really became prominent in the Battle of the Newmarket Heights. And what makes this battle, which is typical of many battles, was after the two white divisions on two occasions failed to take the hill, and they called in the colored troops, they decided to give the colored troops to fight the well-positioned Confederate troops with cannon and rifle. Black troops were given rifles with no caps, no bullets, only bayonets. Their will to win for us, their descendants, was so great that they took the hill, but with great loss of life.
Now, you said something about they had no bullets.
They had no bullets. So,
Why? Talk about that. Yeah. How you doing?
Because two white divisions on two occasions had failed to win the hill. They were defeated. So how can some colored troops win the hill? To issue them bullets would be a waste of bullets. And money was short. So give them rifle and bayonet with no bullets to take a hill that two divisions on two occasions of white troops with bullets could not take the hill. So the 4,000 colored troops with no bullets was gathered and prepared to take the Newmarket Heights hill. But they had a battle cry. The battle cry was Fort Pillow. Earlier, I had said Fort Love. It was actually Fort Pillow. And Fort Pillow was the battle cry of some other battles. What happened is, April 12th, in 1864, a small fort, and it was Fort Pillow, there was a garrison by a small contingent of African-American troops, a small contingent, and they were overrun by a tremendous superior force of rebel troops. The Union force surrendered that evening after an intense, vigorous, but hopeless fight. The rebels were led by Lieutenant General Nathan Bedford Force. Earlier, I had made the statement he was Colonel Force. He had become a lieutenant general. He was no longer colonel. He later became the creator of the infamous Ku Klux Klans and a Southern Baptist church. General Forster's men rounded up all the people at Fort Pillow, the women, the few soldiers that was left. All told was 300 soldiers, women, and children. After they surrendered, they put them in a church, locked the doors and windows, and set the church afire and burned them alive. That was Fort Pillow. And African-American troops entered all battles with the cry, "Remember Fort Pillow." From that point on, they were an inspired army in many battles. And their cry, "Remember Fort Pillow." And Lawrence Dunbar memorized the massacre in his famed poem, "The Colored Troops." And at Fort Pillow, God have mercy on the deeds. It was 2 months later that Fleetwood's 4th Brigade shouted, "Remember Fort Pillow," along with 3 black regiments. that they took the battle at the New Market Heights. They went on, and they would not allow the flag to touch the ground. When one of the colored troops was carrying the banner, the proud flag, if he was shot, before he fell and the flag would touch the ground, a colored soldier would pick it up and cry, "Remember Fort Pillow." And they ran up that hill over their own bodies, the men, and reached the top, and with bayonets only, fought back, holding the line. And when the whites looking down and hearing that eerie scream, "Remember Fort Pillow," and the determination in their eyes coming against cannon and ball fire, took the hill with bayonets only, and routed and opened up the pathway to attack Richmond. Richmond was attacked, and it was the colored soldiers who ran Lee. Lee ran, and his troops ran from them and surrendered to the colored troops, which was the end of the Civil War. Remember Fort Pillow. Battle cry, they needed no bullets because they were fighting for the dignity and freedom of their people. From the diary of Sergeant Fleetwood. It clearly, the truth of the history of this country did not start with the Constitution. It really didn't start with the English introduction of the Atlantic slave trade that they officially end in May of 207 when the Queen of England visited Jamestown and officially announced the end of the 400-year slave trade that closed the prophecy of Genesis 15, 13, and 14. Genesis chapter 15, verses 13 and 14. After 400 years of slavery and oppression, also of that period and of that time of revelation, and destroying the symbol of that slave trade. The great merchants who got rich on trading, not only gold and silver and all manner of things, but slaves and the souls of men. And that city of that great symbol, Babylon, the city of sin, the city of horror, New York City, that symbol would be destroyed. And from afar, they'd look at the smoke burning and see the end of that symbol of world trade merchants who had become respected men based on the slaves and the souls of men. That's in Revelation 18. Read the whole Revelations, the prophecy on what would happen in 18. And it did happen. 911. People stood afar and saw the smoke from that city, that sin city. Revelations will fulfill 911. Who? All I can say, we know that Revelations was fulfilled. The prophecy was fulfilled on those merchants of slaves and the souls of men. And the 400-year end of that period did happen as prophesied when the Queen of England came in May of 207. And in prophecy, there would be 3 woes to that nation would happen. The first woe around her neck that she still has, the Iraq War, the Iraq and Afghanistan War that started as a great woe. America running out of water to drink. Without water, there can be no agriculture. Running out of water is a woe, a terrible woe about any human or living thing. Without water, our plants cannot survive. Without water, we cannot survive. And they had to admit, towns in Tennessee, the water was non-existent. Town well was completely dry. Water was rationing. City, area after area. They could not hide the water crisis anymore. Then the whole world went bankrupt. And President Bush announced to the world another woe around the neck of America. its financial system had brought about the bankruptcy of the world financial institution. And just yesterday, France financial status was taken away. It's no longer a high rating, bringing another negative component to the euro, the world financing, the woe of the 2,000-year march of the Gentile was bankrupt. This country is yet to face another downturn in the economy based on that bankruptcy. And the president we have today was put into election that was awaited by the whole world to bring about change from that 2007 bankruptcy. People were suddenly out of work who thought they had a beautiful future and was crying for change, integrity in the government. And government stand had to change. One country, women with a rose marched on the government, and the government left office. People in Greece rioted because of the IMF policies of the bankruptcy. Italy, Spain, the whole world had to go and create bailout plans, stimulus money to falsely keep up the world system that had went bankrupt. This country, President Bush, put in billions of dollars as a stimulus plan.
You mean
President Bush.
Oh,
President Bush put in the first $500 million. Obama came in as president on change, bringing integrity to the government. Of the Wall Street greed, the CEO's industry needed integrity. This was the cry. And we find the election of that year, of 2008, it was a cry, an election for change. And November 7th, the 307th day of the year, which is related to Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 7. The 307th day of the year is Jeremiah 307. That 307th day of the year, we find that November the 2nd, or the second chapter of Jeremiah 30, was the glorious day, the beginning that would happen on the events of the third chapter, of the third verse. Well, what happened? The third verse relates to November the 3rd. Well, what human events in the world that would cause the world to be dancing in the street, to be a day of Thanksgiving? November the 3rd was the results of the election, November the 2nd. November the 2nd was the incident that would bring about the removal of the chain and the bonds around the people's necks. All of the prophecies then was fulfilled. The bonds and chains will be removed from the neck of who? Of the indigenous people of Alkebulan, whose chain and bonds was put on their neck when the 1865 slave system ended in America and brought depression into Europe. They had to concentrate on taking the resources and moving in Africa to end their depression that happened when they could no longer build slave ships. They could no longer build chains and irons for the slaves. There's no longer slave products coming into Europe. All of the sailors, the makers of the ships and of the chains, were suddenly unemployed. And they looked to Africa, so they came into the continent to replace that human resources